A lot to get to. Obviously, we're going to start with the horrible news that happened yesterday out of Wisconsin at the Abundant Life Christian School. A 15-year-old female student opened fire and then took her own life after murdering people on these school grounds. And so I want to dive into this a little differently. I want to start off by talking about an audit report here in Arizona. One of the things I've done when we see things like this have happened over the years, I remember Columbine, Virginia Tech, when it happened on that college campus. And then what we've seen in these crimes is I'm going to do my best to stay away from the gun control argument again. I don't want to get into that right now, but I want to talk about dealing the situation as best we can. This is from ABC 15. Eleni Dow, I think is how you pronounce it. Eleni Dow wrote a story about the Arizona Auditor General's office released nearly a 100-page report this month. And it states that the schools it reviewed, and I didn't do all of them, I don't think, but the schools it reviewed, none of the school emergency operation plans, or EOPs, fully met the state's minimum standard. And none of the schools fully implemented and tested their plan. The EOP encompasses a plan for any type of emergency, which could include wildlife coming onto campus, toxic exposures, or school shootings. This plan is somewhat of a blueprint for schools to activate if an emergency were to happen. I'm reading from the story. The standards were laid out by the Arizona Department of Education with the help of the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs, or DEMA. Some of the standards laid out in the EOP could include specifying relocation sites, transportation in case of emergency, practice drills, and more. So before I go any further in the story, let's start there. When I was, we all had fire drills when we were kids. There were differing things that happened. If you're a little older than me, you remember the bomb threats and the threats of nuclear war, and you would have to hide under your desk, and those days are past. But that was the threat then, and that was the implementation of a plan of what we do. We had fire drills at our school. The teachers had to escort kids down the hall, and we had to walk out onto the football field, and the teachers had to do a head count of everybody in the class to make sure that he or she had all of their students. It was all done in a way so that there was a plan in place that if an emergency happened, we all know what an EOP is. We're at a place now where, and we're probably going to find out about this girl in the coming days, that there were signs, and nothing is 100% accurate, but we know that there have been warning signs. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in South Florida, the kid that shot up that high school, that brought a rifle onto campus and opened fire on campus, his nickname given to him by the students at that school was School Shooter. Students said when it happened, we knew who did it. I've talked about this before. Jared Loughner, who opened fire on that public event with Gabrielle Giffords, Congresswoman Giffords, that murdered all those people and so severely injured the Congresswoman. When they did follow-up interviews, when they did the interviews to find out about this guy, he was so dangerous they had asked him to leave school until he got mental health care. There was a girl that was in classes with him that said she sat in the desk closest to the door with her purse on her lap in case this guy did something. When you look at the shooter in Colorado, he was a graduate student in Colorado, and he was having such a mental health crisis, an intervention team from the university was going to intervene. And he had dropped out of school, so they didn't, because they didn't believe that they had the jurisdiction anymore. Not their fault. But there was already signs that this was happening. So when you look at an EOP, responding to an emergency and a crisis, everybody has changed. The police have changed how they do things. I've talked about this so many times with cops, and I've said it on the air. The old plan in policing was to set up a perimeter, make sure officers were safe, call in the SWAT team and backup and resources, And the problem with that was Virginia Tech exposed the shooting. If you don't remember what happened at Virginia Tech, the shooting that happened there is you could hear the cops on their radios, and in the background you could hear the gunfire as the gunman was indiscriminately murdering people in classrooms. So the cops across this country have changed the way they respond to active shooter situations. Officer safety is secondary. You engage and neutralize the threat at the risk of your own life. That's the orders and that's the training. So all that's changed. So here we have our public schools in Arizona. And just to be fair, there were school districts, including the Phoenix Union High School District, that didn't want cops on campus. We've had here in the Valley now, we've got the Department of Education across the state that is allocating millions of dollars for more cops on campus, for schools that need them, and for counselors, mental health counselors and social workers on campus. When you don't have someone, and we need to have someone that does this, we need to have someone whose job it is to recognize and own the threats. And what I mean by that is when you have a student that seems to be spiraling out of control or seems to have something going on with them where they are deteriorating, there has to be someone that knows. So I'll give you an example. This girl, and this is all made up. This is all conjecture. But let's say this girl at this school, she begins to act strangely. She begins to say dark things. And one of her friends tells a teacher. That teacher goes and reports to whoever it is in charge of these threats. And it's logged. It's like, all right, so we're not, nothing here, nothing to see here yet. But we've got a report of something. And then she makes a threat in the lunchroom, or there's an outburst, or she's on a school bus, or she's on a school trip. And then they begin to see more erratic behavior. That's owning the threat. That is, at some point, we have to have a sit down with this girl and her parents. Nothing is going to be a fail-safe. Nothing is going to solve problems 100%. But if we are as concerned as we are about the mental health of our children, and we should be, whether it is, and people have so many theories about why this is happening. Why are we radicalizing our kids? Is it the medications that we give them? Was it COVID and the isolation? We should get to the bottom of it if we can. But there has to be in any place, in a workplace. We work for a pretty big company. We have a lot of people in this building. And when somebody is dealing with a mental health issue, and that's what this is most of the time, it is about intervention. I mean, if you had a friend, if you had a coworker who looked like they weren't feeling well, you would say, "Are you okay? You don't look good. You look like you don't feel well." But the idea that you've got a coworker that is beginning to behave erratically, usually it's HR, you go to somebody, but to chronicle that and intervene and not all of a sudden when it's all said and done come back and say, we knew that person. We called that kid school shooter. And when it happened, we knew who did it. So we're going to get into this, obviously, this morning. It's going to be a big part of the topics we talk about. But in Arizona, our schools have not sufficiently implemented the EOP. Any of the schools that were audited, and not all of them were, but none of the schools that were audited had fully implemented to the state's minimum standards. So we can argue and we can jump to conclusions about gun control. We can have all those conversations, and eventually we will. We always do. But right now, there is a standard that's been set. It's not being met. And in light of what happened yesterday, when do we light the fire under some people to make sure that they do it? I think it's a valid question.
Thanks for watching the Mike Broomhead Show. Tap to watch the first season of Amazing Arizonans, a KTAR News podcast. You can also click the button in the middle to subscribe.